the philosophy in breathwork is not, we have special talents that we impart our gifts to other people. Our talent is to help wake up the healing agencies inside that are naturally there with every person. We're essentially looking to work ourselves out of a job. Stanislav Grof discovered after he couldn't use LSD anymore in his research is that to create an altered state of consciousness, you have to signal the brain to leave behind the prefrontal cortex and to go into the midbrain. There's an organic knowledge in the midbrain around survival. It uses emotional intelligence. It helps the organism in situations where it could get overwhelmed and die. The bus is coming down the street and it's picking up speed and it's heading right for you. So your amygdala immediately signals danger. It sends impulses to the thalamus. The thalamus says, well, bus coming at 40 miles an hour, 100 feet away. This is emergency. Sends signals to the hypothalamus to cut off the, let's stop and think about this, frontal cortex, and to go immediately into survival, fight or flight. So we're using energy now in the sympathetic nervous system, which is set up to keep us alive. So no, I'm not going to fight the bus. I'm going to flee.
Yeah.
This happens in a millisecond, happens much faster than we can think about it. Our brain is taking care of us, and it's not consulting higher wisdom of the prefrontal cortex. It's immediately taking care of us. So if I didn't move fast enough and I didn't get killed by the bus, but it did hit me and I'm laying on the pavement, my body will go into another parasympathetic stage, which is a freeze response, because it's conserving my energy now for survival. I can no longer fight, I can no longer flee, but I'm still breathing. I'm using my brainstem, is still working. And so then I'm taken to a hospital. And in the hospital, I'm given all the care that is needed to keep me breathing. And finally, to bring me back to a conscious awareness. First of all, I don't know, what am I doing in a hospital? You were hit by a bus. Was I? I don't actually want to remember that right now. I got parts of me that are keeping that overwhelm, that impact that happened right there. It's like I need a little more recovery time where I experience my body being impacted by a bus. Not appropriate at that time. My friendly breath worker comes in. And now we're in the enlightened age where they have breath workers in hospitals. So my breath worker looks at my chart. Okay, Jim was hit by a bus and he could use some help in his recovery. And so the breath worker starts me out with some faster than normal breathing, right? Wrong. Not where you start. The situation right now is I need just to get regulated. I found that my blood pressure is off the charts, and so I'm working with some coherent breathing, which is scientifically shown. It's the only thing the Food and Drug Administration sanctions in the United States other than a pill for lowering blood pressure. It's been demonstrated to work. Doing just coherent breathing for a couple of weeks, a couple of times a day, 3 months later, still has an effect on my blood pressure.
Wow.
Okay, so now my friendly breath worker realizes the situation and uses the slower than normal breathing. All right, it's a month down the road, and I've been in physical therapy. I'm beginning to walk. but I'm not so keen about going outside where there are buses. In fact, I'm kind of holed up. So my friendly breath worker comes over and recognizes that I've got a lot of physical capacity going now. I'm eating regularly, but I'm still kind of emotionally impaired. And I'm wanting some help.
Yep.
I'd like to go see I'm a younger man at this time, I'd like to go see my girlfriend. So now that my breath worker begins to explore a little bit, what's happening is I start to talk about not being able to see my girlfriend. So my breath worker notices that my shoulders are a little tight and my jaw is
Mm.
a little constricted. And they ask me, are you willing to experiment a little bit, Jim, with a different kind of breathing? And I say, okay, I'm willing if it helps, but I'm still scared. So my breath worker introduces just a little bit of faster than normal breathing and watches what happens to my body. At first, I get a little tense, and then they remind me of the all important thing. See, what medical people don't distinguish often and why they're afraid of it and suppress it is they don't distinguish hyperventilation from superventilation. Hyperventilation is I'm pushing the exhale. Superventilation is I am breathing faster and I'm relaxing on the exhale,
Mm.
meaning I am now signaling the brain, let's go into the right brain. Here's
Mm.
where those memories of trauma are stored. Here's where we can now begin to reprogram some of the fear response that's still in Jim's body. We can now help write some new neural pathways that he can, for 5 minutes, just begin to feel more energized, feel more of the sympathetic nervous system response, but relax into it. And within a
Mm.
couple of weeks, he's having a full 30, maybe 40-minute session, faster normal breathing,
Right.
because he's learned to slow down when he's going too fast. He's learned the signs of when his nervous system is getting overstimulated. So, because this breath worker has read the works of a person who's not a breath worker,
Mm.
namely Babette Rothschild. And Babette Rothschild has worked with hundreds of, I don't know, thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of people who have experienced trauma. She has actually got a beautiful graph of just what their body looks like, the coloration of their face, the tension in their muscles, everything,
Yeah.
all the way from going from hyporegulation to hyperregulation. And so my breath worker has been clued into rule number one in doing faster than normal breathing with a person that's trauma is you don't get into the traumatic material until that person has learned to de-escalate their symptoms. Once they have learned that, then it is safe to go into the actual traumatic material. She won't even let people talk about buses, until they learn to regulate their system enough now that they can say, oh, slow down. I'm starting to be a deer in the headlight. I'm starting to go into freeze, go back to slower than normal breathing, or something that sounds very untherapeutic, but is actually, I use it quite a bit now with people that have been severely traumatized. It's called distraction. Oh, look
Yeah.
at the water bottle over here, Jim. What shape on the water bottle? Oh, it's the IBF, the GIC from the 2019. Oh, yeah. Okay, breathing a little easier now. And so we learn to help people stop the train wreck, get out of the right brain, get back into something logical, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things that you sense, 4 things that you, then as I gain that confidence, I can go into a full, faster than normal breathing where I'm now in the right brain. I'm not being controlled by just my thoughts, and I can start to bring up the things that have been in implicit only memory. Because when that hypothalamus cut off connections to my prefrontal cortex, I was hit by the bus. My body still remembers being hit by the bus. My frontal cortex, my memory circuits there don't, but it is in my brain. And so now I can start to go back to that circuitry. And I may not actually remember a bus coming at me, but I remember the feeling. I remember the feeling of terror.
So,
And my breath worker is helping me continue to relax on the exhale, to, as they say, breathe through it. One session, I'm cured. Everything's fine now. Well, maybe not. When I went to grad school in the 1960s, if you can believe that, we didn't have courses on trauma. There was shell shock, in World War II, that was, but everyday traumas and things like that, we didn't know about that. I had to learn about that from my clients, from people that I taught. And so in the world of psychotherapy, when they first recognized, oh yes, there are such things as people have trauma, okay, you will get 6 sessions to cure that. And if you find that you haven't done a good enough job and you're not cured by 6 sessions, you can ask for an extension to 10. All right. So this was the naivete about what it would take to actually help reprogram trauma. So I had a series of unfortunate instances, they say, happened to me in the past 5 years of my life. It's like, it's not what happens to you, but it's what you do with it. One of those circumstances, besides the 5 bypass heart surgery, the following year, I had a bicycle accident in which I broke my scapula, clavicle, and 7 ribs. And taken to the trauma center. And I think, fortunately, I didn't have any surgery. They just said, oh, let your body heal. But I got back on the bike. And the first thing that happened is it fell over. It fell over. It took a while to reprogram those associated with riding the bike. That's where we call in a couple of other brains. We know what emanates vibrational frequency from a person's brain, and we also know the vibrational frequency that emanates from a person's heart. You know why they call it coherent breathing? Is because of 6 breaths per minute brings the vibrations of the brain and the heart together in a harmony. Because there's an emotional intelligence that, if not part of the healing, our brains can't do it all, just without the power of our thinking. There's also the third brain, which we're finding more and more about, which is the gut. When they're discovering all of how these 3 brains work together, of course, in the beginning, there's people that now that say, forget the cortex, forget the heart, it's all in the gut. The gut is the center. Well, it's how these 3 work together. And guess what? Ancient traditions knew that. The Taoists knew that. And so I've learned ways of breathing in the Taoist technique that even most breath workers would say is bad breathing. But at a certain stage of evolution, reverse abdominal breathing is actually a healthy form. But it's not by using your abdominal muscles to contract. It's by using your dantian. So there's so much stuff we're yet to learn. And this is what's so exciting about this field. Some of it is stuff right under our nose that has been taught by teachers, for thousands of years. And some of this new stuff we're discovering. I like the principle of collaboration. So we're working together. You are my breath worker. I got hit by the bus. You're not coming here to cure me by making me get back on that bus and hug the bus driver. And no, you're working with me in a collaborative approach. That's why I have this whole raft of bioenergetic techniques we'll use in breath. It comes down to I only use 3 or 4. But sometimes it'll occur to me, oh, huh, this seems like it might work. What I'll say is, I have an experiment. Are you willing to try this now? And here's what it's going to do. I want you to keep your eyes open now. And you're laying on your back. And I'm going to take your feet. I'm going to ask you to bend your knees. I will hold your feet. And I want you to look me in the eyes as you do this now. And I won't take this personally. I've done this a lot, so I can take care of myself. And meanwhile, I've got a stance with one foot in back of the other, so because I've had you stretch your legs out, so I know that when your legs are all the way stretched out and up, I'm not flying into the wall. I say, what I'm going to ask you to do is to imagine that this thing that has been so aversive to you, it might have been a parent that beat you, or it might have been a bully in school. Or I want you to imagine now I'm putting pressure on, and I want you to kick out with your feet, eyes open, look right at me and say, get away. Yeah. And kick with your feet. And then we'll do that several times. Okay? But I want you to breathe, keep your eyes open the whole time. And what we're looking to do is to give your nervous system the opportunity to do something you couldn't when you were a kid. Okay? This is what we're doing. We're looking to free that nervous system from the fear of all that power that you have in there, which is very good stuff. And we want you to be able to use it on the basketball court, or whatever. All right. So what I've done is I've collaborated and we're working together. I don't say, okay, do this. Now do. No, I tell you what I'm proposing. You are staying in current reality. Your eyes are open. We do the exercise. I tell you what we're going to do. We do it. And then I tell you what we did. They always say that's what you do in giving a good speech. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You tell them, and then I'm going to tell you, here's what I told you. This brings it in. It's like, okay, now you got it. So it's called a collaborative approach. We're working together. It's also an experimental approach, because I didn't say, and when you kick, you're going to feel anger and a great relief. You're going to be so glad that you did this. It's collaborative, but it's also experimental. You might end up crying. You might end up feeling sad. You might end up getting really scared, and we'll have to work with the fear. It's experimental. In my early days of teaching, and I think, oh, here's a bioenergetic technique that I've seen used to really get people to feel such and such. And so I tell them, and they do it, and they feel something exactly the opposite, but it was great. And it's like, oh yeah. So be willing to be surprised.